see us become better shepherds and have a good time with friends. I'm one of the hosts. I'm Frank Gill. I'm up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. All the way in Baltimore, Maryland, my buddy Jeff Simpson. Down in Sumter, South Carolina.
What was that?
That's
my
how
buddy
people say
Delmar
hi in
Pete.
Baltimore.
Bonjour.
Together, streaming from beautiful Safety Harbor, Florida, we have Andrew Larson
Hey.
and Timothy Miller.
Hello, world.
That was the most awkward introduction we've had.
I know.
So bad.
Also, Del, did you notice how perfectly in sync our last coffee drink was?
It was like, it was poetic almost.
Go back and watch it.
Guys, how we doing? I'm refreshed. I got back from Florida. So far, COVID free. I've eaten like 7 Cuban sandwiches. I had a Publix cake. Literally I ticked off ticked off the Florida checklist.
You gotta do it, man.
It was amazing. How you guys doing?
My building flooded twice in the last week, so that was fun.
Oh,
What?
And you had to cancel services.
And I had to cancel service because of rain. Yeah, pretty good.
Great week for you.
Yeah, we have these
Wow.
things up here called basements, and if you don't watch out when it rains hard and it flash floods, you can get water in it.
Ooh.
So it's a good time. But we're all good. We lost 2 reams of paper, and that's it because we kept things off the floor last time it flooded.
Smart.
I had to call the police last night because I caught someone trying to break into the church on the security camera.
Ooh.
That was exciting.
Always fun.
Wow. And the cops showed up.
Yeah, they showed up and I talked to them through the security camera. It was very senior pastory of me. I said, no, we don't want to press charges. We're just concerned for his heart. And it was good.
And you gave him the stuff he was stealing anyway, like Les Mis.
That's right.
Yeah,
It was.
take the silver.
He was trying to go through our after hours delivery bin. And so I told the deputy, I was like, the best case scenario is he's going to get $40 worth of Office Depot supplies. So I don't know what he's looking for in there, but whatever.
Good luck.
Have you guys
Wow.
ever had someone break into your church and like stolen something before that you're aware of?
Yes. We
That's
had youth group kids mastermind a break-in of several houses in the neighborhood around my previous church. And then they broke into the church building and stole thousands of dollars worth of sound equipment,
Wow.
which was then sold on Craigslist. And they both went to jail. Fortunately, it was the homeowners nearby the church that pressed the charges, so we didn't have to be the ones to press the charges against the kids in our youth group.
Wow. I know we have a campus that we just purchased that we're in the process of remodeling. So but it's been empty for years. And one day our facility person was going to go over to mow the grass, and he saw that there was a window that was broken into. And so he went inside to investigate, and like luckily it's a pretty empty building, but we were housing all of our equipment that we were using for our mobile campus for that campus. So like there's literally thousands and thousands of dollars of equipment, but
All
none
in
of it was
cases
taken.
on wheels, probably. Right?
All in cases. It's very mobile.
Oh my gosh.
But luckily nothing was gone. Our guess is he came in, saw it, and was like, we need to get a truck. But he left. But what was crazy is when he broke the window, however he broke it, he cut his hand. And so there was a bloody glove on the floor, which like I don't know how true CSI is, but we have his DNA. But like
And you have his bloody glove.
yeah. So
Very OJ-esque.
we boarded up the window, and we got all of the equipment out of that building. So now it's basically just a big shell. But luckily nothing was stolen, but it was pretty scary because we did just purchase that building like a month before.
Looking for the one glove, bloody hand bandit.
Do you know what's even more fun than church thievery? It's senior pastors' mics getting left on after they preach.
Yeah.
I saw
Please
that.
tell me that happened.
Oh, it absolutely happened to
It
my friend
happened
right here.
to me.
You didn't go
And by
like
that-
pee, did you? I hope you did.
No, I didn't pee.
Okay.
I just sang my little heart out, and it was not good. It was not.
Was that
good.
on the stream?
Dude,
Oh, yeah.
the Lord is smiling so hard
And-
on you right now.
My parents texted me because they were watching from home, and they're like, "Hey, we enjoyed your solo." That's
And all the
it was
blood
bad.
left your face.
And so then I go up to do the benediction. It was so after the sermon, closing song, and then benediction. And I'm like, so I just got a text message that my microphone was on, and we will be deleting this video immediately.
It was
Forever.
not deleted.
It was.
We cut that section out and just
Good.
posted it, and I just shared it on my personal page. So if you want to hear Andrew's angelic voice, head
I
on
saw
over
We
to
need to share that
Facebook,
to the
Instagram.
Practically Pastoring Facebook
We do.
group too.
Oh, it will be
Andrew,
there.
I saw
Yeah.
it. It made my past worship leader heart smile though, because I would have been like, my pastor's actually singing. Yeah.
It was not my proudest moment. It was.
Whenever
It was not
I get
great.
handed a mic pack from the sound guy, and they're like, "You can leave it on. I'll just mute it." I'm like, "Nope, not trusting
Nope.
you." Like,
That's
I'm-
Switch.
I know
I
enough
always unplug the mic from the pack before I go into the bathroom.
Nice. That's
Good
Just
nice.
in
call.
case.
Just in case that kind of wireless doesn't work.
I shoot videos with my brother. We do weddings, and it's crazy. We put the mics on the people, and they just forget that they were being recorded. And we have a litany of things that we definitely can't put in those highlight videos.
That's how funny like reality TV works.
I mean-
People just forget.
They do. I mean, because you think about it, husband and wife just get married. They walk into the vestibule area. You know what he's whispering into her ear. We got all that. It's
You know too.
You
I
can
know
sud-
too. As I don't need to know, but I know.
You can suddenly charge a whole lot more for that video.
Yes, I can.
Yikes. Guys, I'm super excited that we're back together. Before we dive into the clergy cliff notes, I want to make a couple announcements. Obviously, we have great reviews on iTunes. If you're not aware, like a lot of you guys and ladies have said amazing things. If you haven't done so, if you listen to this on Apple Podcasts, I would love for you to go and give us a nice 5-star review if you think we're worth a 5-star, and that's a little a couple words explaining what you like about the show. We really appreciate it. It helps us. And we are giving away, as Delmar is wearing right now, a nice, super soft, super comfortable, practically pastoring t-shirt. And we have about like 20 shirts to give away.
I
And
went to Disney World last week.
Yeah,
And some guy came up to me and said, "I really like your T-shirt."
Ooh.
nice.
And I said, "Oh, do you listen to the podcast?" And he said, "No, what's that?" But he liked my T-shirt.
man.
It's a good start.
It is a good start. Well, if you want one of these shirts that, by the way, have been given to us by Sunday Cool, a great t-shirt company down in Central Florida. If you want one of these amazing shirts, all you got to do is do a couple things. If you're not in the Facebook group, join our Facebook group, okay? Practically Pastoring. Type that in the search bar. It's in the show notes. Join our Facebook group. We have conversations throughout the week. I've been forgetting this, but every single Sunday we do a highs and lows of how our service has been, and that's been kind of cool, kind of just praising God for what's happening with other people, but also like lamenting together of our failures, like Andrew forgetting to turn off his mic and stuff like that.
So good.
And then we also have, but we also want you to, like, every pastor knows other pastors, so like invite other pastors to our Facebook group, because we want to get that Facebook group up to about 500 people. Same with our Instagram. We have, I think we actually, a lot of people joined our Instagram the past week. I think we're at like in the mid 300s, which is great. I want to see over 500. Let's get 500 people following us on Instagram. So if you're listening to us and you haven't followed us on Instagram, go follow and invite someone else, as well as subscribing to the podcast. So Facebook group, Instagram, subscribe to the podcast. If you do all that stuff, there's a couple posts in both the Facebook group and Instagram where if you comment underneath there, that'll let us know you did these things and that you invited people, and then your name will be in a drawing. And once we hit those 500 numbers, that is when we will start choosing the people that are going to win these shirts. So that's where we are. I'm super excited. These shirts are great. And yeah, same thing as Andrew said, I've worn this shirt and people have been like, that's a cool shirt. And so it could be yours.
Yeah, I gave my wife one, and she has worn that shirt like 2 or 3 times in the last couple weeks. She says it's like the most comfortable shirt. She
She's
just
very
wears
soft.
it everywhere. Yeah.
I love it.
Notes, Andrew, I would love to start with you because I actually read this article, and at first I was like, oh, this is dumb. I understand what's happening. And then I kept reading. I'm like, oh, I don't know how I feel about it anymore. So Andrew, I would love for you to kind of share with us what you got in your Clergy Cliff Note.
Well, as you may or may not know, Sorry, I'm trying to pull up the article myself now so I can get names right. Um, Wheaton College removed their chaplain, Tim Blackman, from their faculty in the past week or so, and it's been a pretty big, messy thing. And apparently, it comes down to what he says is a little bit of cultural misunderstanding. He is a black man who grew up in Denmark, I believe, and he says that some things just didn't quite translate between the different uh, cultures of his family's heritage and the American South and the European um, environment that he was raised in, and then in Chicago. But some stuff just seems like a little bit of immaturity going on here. He made some comments that were perceived to be sexually suggestive to coworkers, which were not very well received. Apparently, somebody in his last church over in Europe left a Karma Sutra book in his pastor's bookshelf. And so when he was packing up his books, or when he was unpacking his books once he got to his office at Wheaton, he found it with a note from this former parishioner and thought it was hilarious and left it out on his desk, which, if you are a Wheaton College chaplain and someone comes into your office and they see that laying on your desk, that's probably going to raise a few eyebrows. And so now there's just a he said, she said, he said again, back and forth between this gentleman and Wheaton. And of course, now RNS, the religious news service, has gotten involved, and it's become a story because, I mean, Wheaton is one of the flagpole institutions for American evangelicalism, and now they've got this kind of scandal going on. For Tim and I, one thing that makes this a little bit more of an interesting story is the official university and then seminary of record within our denomination is also in Chicago, and that chaplain was fired about a year and a half ago as well for very, very different reasons. But here we have two of the most prominent religious institutions in Chicago removing their campus chaplains in very public fashions in just a short amount of time. And he's also now raised 19 grand on a GoFundMe since he's been fired. It's like, hey, I got fired, so why don't you help me start a new ministry instead of... And again, I'm not picking sides. I just don't know that...
What a world we live in.
That starting a GoFundMe after you get publicly fired...
Severance? Nah, GoFundMe.
To be fair, I think it was a group of friends who started the GoFundMe for him. So I don't think it was him who started it. But yeah.
But he's going to try
to... He's got well over 20,000 on there, I believe.
He's trying to start a new parachurch ministry and wants you to go fund him.
I think, so when I moved to Milwaukee, I actually visited Chicago to check out some of these like historic Christian universities. Like I went to Moody, I went to Wheaton, and I have a friend who's a pastor at a church in the community where Wheaton is at. And Wheaton is like, one thing I've learned about the Midwest is that there are these pockets in the Midwest that feel like they were just transplanted from the South. Like Indianapolis, it feels like that. And then for sure, there's these like suburbs in Chicago where it's like, it's way more conservative than the rest of the city. And it's like the Wheaton area especially feels like you're in a small town, southern city where there's like a church on every corner type of thing. And it just feels so weird because the rest of the Midwest is not necessarily like that. Like it's very Midwestern values. Everyone's nice, but like they also don't put up with crap type of thing. So it's kind of like, I don't know. It's kind of it's an interesting place that coming from the South I had to adapt to this. But when I first read this, I was first tracking. I'm like, I get it. Like sometimes when you come from a background where your like humor is a little drier or a little bit more, I don't know, messier or something like that, like coming to a conservative environment can be jarring. And it's like, you're not doing anything wrong. Your sense of humor is maybe a little more blue than everyone else. But then when it started talking about like sexually explicit stuff or like making inappropriate comments to women, things like that, like the Kama Sutra book, that is, I do agree with you, Andrew. That was like a little immature move. Because like at the end of the day, you are like, as much as we want to have a funny sense of humor, and maybe even there's this desire to like transform the pastor into a new generation where we're not as like buttoned up and kind of like seen as like whatever pastors from the past. Like we are still held to a higher standard, and we still have to be above reproach, which is something that's a principle in scripture that surpasses all generations and time, where we're called to like not even have a hint of immorality or sin in our lives, right? And so I think like when I read that, I was like, off-color jokes or whatever, right? Like that's fine. But like when you're like making stuff that's maybe like, there was something about like he asked a woman to sit on his lap or something, right? Like that was somewhere in the article. That's
Yeah,
like,
and then she wrote a letter saying, no, it was okay.
I mean, for me, a lot of
it's
this
weird.
falls under the category of prudence. Like, I don't know that I can necessarily say. I mean, some of the stuff in this article that he said seems like maybe it's crossing the line into sin, but this isn't a church. This is a school. So you can't. I don't think you can superimpose like church polity onto this. But I mean, right in the article, there's a quote where they, upon careful review, we looked into the handbook that everybody agreed to, and his, some of his jokes on multiple occasions cross the lines. I mean, they're a private employer, and like, I mean, I just think it's on you when you go somewhere. Like, if that happens once, hey, and I mean, I don't know what pastor or would think it would be like a smart idea to leave something like a Kama Sutra book on your desk. Like, I mean, even when I was a youth pastor, just for the sake of, youth come over, I mean, the alcohol thing, like I just wouldn't keep beer in my fridge. And it wasn't because I was like, it's a sin to have it in your house or anything. I'm okay with having some, but I just, for the sake of not, creating that situation where things can be misconstrued. I mean, I just think it's a prudence thing. And on top of it, like, I assume he has a family. So now his family is dealing with, having for their, the provider.
Daddy's in the newspaper.
Yeah. Not only that, but now they have to like, where's the income coming from? Because
GoFundMe.
Huh? Oh yeah, GoFundMe. But you know what I'm saying? Like I'm sure this is stressing his wife out.
Yeah.
And like that's something you got to think through as well. Like this is not just you, and I don't know. To me this is just, I put this in the same category. Honestly, we joked around last week about Jerry Falwell Jr. and his picture. Like this is in a very similar category for me of like very unwise.
And it's unwise, but just to play devil's advocate, the history of Wheaton, and none of us went to Wheaton. I don't think any of us have really, none of us are here trying to be anti-Wheaton either. But Wheaton, the building, I'm trying to think of the name of like their big famous hall, but I mean, it was built after the Scopes monkey trials in Tennessee, and it was built to look like a fortress, to be like, no, we are going to be this fortress of fundamental thought, and we are going to, keep the rest of the world out. And so when Wheaton goes and they hire someone like this, I'm sure the conversation is something like, hey, we're not your grandpa's Wheaton anymore. We don't want to be this school. We want to be a school that is reaching people who will then go out and reach people. We want to disciple a different, not a different type of thought, but we want to be open to change so that by all means we might reach those for Christ that we haven't been reaching. And so when they hire him, he's like, well, this is great. This is a fit because, I'm not quite in the same vein as what historically this school has been. Theologically, yes, I'm there, but I'm going to make sex jokes and I'm going to do this and I'm going to be kind of funny. But institutions like that, it's like the speedboat versus the aircraft carrier. You can't change the culture of an institution just by showing up.
Well, and I think that we really have to take into consideration, we do struggle with this on some level as pastors because we want to seem human to other people. And I can see how you can go down this slope. I was meeting with a pastor the other day, and he said, I took out a congregant the other day, and he wouldn't connect with me. He was just a good old boy. And he said, so I just made the decision, I'm going to cuss. And I'm like, you what? He said, yeah. So the pastor, I mean, it was a low grade cuss word. He used like hell,
Grade.
So it was like a low grade, like
it was a PG cuss word.
Yeah, it was a PG. Yeah, it would have passed my homeschooler test, But like, I guess the point being made, he said, what the hell? And he says it was interesting. He watched this whole person's countenance change, and they were like, "Oh, let's talk." So I'm not saying ends justify the means. I don't know. For him, it was calculated. He said, I'm going to do this. It's going to help me be relational. But I also think you have to have like the brakes on that slope, so you know that you're not putting a sex book on your desk at work, you know? So like, I do see like you say, give him, I see the benefit of the doubt where he may have been trying to do. I'm just trying to seem like an average dude, but like there has to be a line. And I think I'm noticing a theme in some of the conversations we have on the podcast. And that really is like a lot of pastors seem to be struggling with just like, where can I be a man or a woman? Where can I just be a human? Versus I am a person who has authority and I am a person who needs to carry myself a certain way.
And I think you hit the nail on the head on something that I believe, and if we're not careful, I think like there's a generation of pastors coming up that has been so jaded by like how the pastor has been for decades that that they might slowly morph into a direction. I'm not trying to speak prophetically at all. This is all anecdotal, but like taking a direction that almost weakens the weight and the authority of the pastorate. But like I think that like the pastorate is a unique role where if I worked at Popeyes and I go through a divorce, I still can go to Popeyes the next day and work, right? But if I go through a divorce as a pastor, that cataclysmically affects my vocation, right? For good or for bad. I don't know. Like, obviously, every denomination is different and stuff like that. But like, there is unique standards that the pastorate has that literally no other field, no other CEO level position in any other environment will have to deal with, where your character is far more important than even your adequacy at the position. Yeah. Where like there's CEOs who are at companies because they inherited because their dad was a CEO, right? Like where like in the church, it's like your character is judged more critically for good or for bad, but also like your life is intrinsic with your vocation. And so therefore when the scripture says like when you're taking, and obviously we're talking all this about a story about a guy who's not a pastor, he's a chaplain. Right. I don't know. I gotta be careful. I don't want to offend anybody who's a chaplain. Chaplaincy
he is an ordained minister.
Yeah.
He was a pastor in the Netherlands, I think.
You're right. So this conversation is still relevant for him. But I guess my point is this is like there is a level of like I don't want to say the word fear, but like caution that everybody should take when you're taking the role of the pastor, because this isn't like a startup or just some random company where like, hey, I'll figure it out. I'll fail. Like there needs to be like some mindful mentors in your life and discipline, because there's standards in scripture that we're held to. And
I think that's why this is a reoccurring theme on this show, Frank, because this is the world that we live in right now of how much is too much to showcase. What do I need to hold in? Do I need to have my Idiot's Guide to Kama Sutra out on my desk? Probably don't need to have that out on my desk. But it's a story that we read almost every single
memorized.
week. Oh, of course you do, Andrew.
No, for me, it's just straight Bible, though, right? This is James 3. Not many of you should become teachers, for you know that who you teach will be judged with greater strictness, you know? And like, for me, that really is speaking, it's to the here and now. Like, we are going to be held even to the standard by our 15-year-old teenagers in our congregation to a higher standard. And having that is definitely tucked in is, I think for me, that's got to be a guiding principle. Is like, yes, we should be relatable, we should be fun, but at the same time, you can never just take that hat off. You just can't. It's kind of like if your best friend, if you work with your best friend, but you're also kind of like his superior, he's your best friend, but in some space, you're always wearing that hat, whether you want to or not.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of the things also, it's like, I mean, in a similar vein as like, work, like if your wife works in church with you, that can be really weird. You know what I'm saying? It's like
I'm aware.
It's one of these where it's like, and maybe that's, you know what, I'm going to shelve that conversation because that might be a good conversation for another day, because there's these, I think when you're young and, you know, like you just started in the ministry, there's this like desire, like, wait, I can get my wife a job at the church and this will be awesome. And you're like, it's not always that awesome. And we should talk about that one day. Hey, Andrew, I appreciate it. That was a really good conversation.
I would push back on a little bit on this continued conversation, Frank. You've I mean, we're friends. We go back a long time, but you've used that example of like, if I worked at Popeyes,
Yeah.
I wouldn't think about it. I actually am beginning to, I'm not sure that I agree with that. I think that's a very evangelical Americanized version of church polity that I'm not sure is true, because all Christians have the same calling on their life. That's what the word vocation means. It comes from the Latin word calling or voice. So I do think as Protestants, we believe in the priesthood of believers. I think we have to be careful that we're not making a clergy laity divide again, where we're saying only us have this specific role and only we feel this pressure. I get it, and I mean I live in it, and that's the world I live in too. But even like Dell, you said from James 3, the next verse, James says, "For we all stumble in many ways." So you see this connection between like there is a particular role that we play, but I don't think that means that every other Christian. There's a sense in which you should be thinking about your character if you're a Christian and you're frying chicken at Popeyes, because for that time, that is the calling that He has placed you in that place. And I think if we do that, what we do is minimize people's understanding that they are also part of the priesthood. Like they are also the way that God is coming to people. And if we, I think it's dangerous to continually say like, oh, pastors have this unique pressure, because that just feeds into that idea that the only way I can serve God is to be a missionary or a pastor. And I can't really, I can't be on mission if I'm just frying chicken. I do the frying chicken thing like on this other time that's like separated from my spiritual life, and then I go do the mission stuff with the church, as opposed to seeing like every aspect of every part of your life is you living on mission, because of that's your identity now. So I know you didn't. I know you're not trying to perpetuate that. I just wanted to.
And on the other side, I think one thing I try to do often in my interpersonal relationships with people at my church is I try to say, I am a human just like everyone else, and I'm a sinner just like everyone else, and I have my own struggles. And one thing I don't want to have is to say that like I'm a holier Christian than everyone else because I'm a pastor. I think though, and I agree with what you're saying, and I think that to stop that divide as much as possible, I think should be a thing that we should desire. I do think though, whether it's anecdotally or just practically speaking, it's like you're not getting fired from Popeyes.
Right. No, I think it's a unique issue that happens when we are paid full time to do the work of ministry. That is, I think that unpaid and bivocational pastors have a unique view on this, that those of us who are full time paid to be in ministry should take heed and understand, because I mean, when I've been around bivo guys or guys that aren't paid at all, like especially in my denomination, a lot of the churches that are not white, like the ethnic churches, are guys that are not paid full time. And so they have a very, I think maybe a lot more biblical view of their calling in life, because they see their quote unquote secular workplace as equal to ministry as what they do at their church. And I think that if our churches were full of people who thought that way, a lot of the kind of frustration and like and disappointment maybe we feel as ministers about our people's lack of evangelism would have a very different flavor, But I know in my context, it's like people really have that separation thing where they think like, yeah, I do my job to just make money to earn a living. They don't see that like that's where God has placed me,
Yeah.
I think it comes down to the GoFundMe though. It's the if you get fired from Popeye's Chicken. By the way, T-Mobile Tuesday.
We love Popeyes. I don't know.
Spicy chicken.
It's
Popeyes. If you want to sponsor us, we won't tell Chick-fil-A.
I will wear a Popeye shirt forever on this podcast.
Forget about the chicken sandwiches. Those mashed potatoes.
I don't even like Chick-fil-A.
I love me some Popeyes mashed potatoes, but we're three of us have our Chick-fil-A cups going. But it's the thing with ministry is you're hired for your competence. Very rarely is someone hired based on, ooh, this person has such great character, we should hire them. No, you are hired based on your competence, but then you're fired based on your character. And that is what is such a difference between most.
That's so good.
And in the American church, a lot of times competence isn't even necessarily biblical values. It's just numbers and
exactly. Right. It's the what can you do for me that somebody else wasn't doing. But it's your character that gets you in trouble, which is why we're discussing this whole thing with Wheaton anyway, and which is why last week the Jerry Falwell conversation.
Yeah.
I mean, say what you will about the guy, but look at where the school was 15 years ago compared to where Liberty is now.
Yeah.
There's a whole lot of competence that was there. But
and then for those of you who watched the Elephant Room, remember we watched that. All those pastors taught, so much competence in that room. You know, those guys. I mean, honestly, they could grow a business. You know, you could throw them in anything. They can make the numbers. They can work people. But why are half of them not in the ministry anymore? It's what you just said, bro.
It's character.
I think Carey Nieuwhof says competence will get you in the room, but character will keep you there. It's a good way to put it. I think too, like we talked about past generations of pastors. I think the turnoff for myself when I'm around, you know, that retirement age pastor now who is, it's the hypocrisy that you see where they're one way when they're quote unquote, you know, they flip the switch on, and they're another way when they flip the switch off. And I know for myself, part of the desire is I don't want to have a switch. Like I just want to be the same person, whether I'm on the platform or not, you know, my same kind of personality comes out. But I think what the danger is that doesn't mean that I need to let my immaturity just stay all the time. Like at some point, my maturity has to grow to where I'm not being hypocritical. My personality is just my personality everywhere, but it's a growing, maturing personality. You know, it's not like I'm faking it because I'm the pastor while I'm in the church office and when I'm preaching, and then the rest of the time I can crack a joke. It's like, you know what I'm saying? The immaturity of my joking even should be growing.
That's good. Well, guys, this was a great discussion. And I appreciate the pushback, Jeff. That
I'm here to push you.
Everyone,
iron sharpen iron.
I do think though, like this is a good microcosm of like what I wish most Christians can do when they disagree, or not even disagree, but like challenge someone's thought, is to be able to do it in grace. And I don't know, I'm on like a high horse about that because I just don't see anyone. It's like you disagree, blocked or whatever. Anyway,
yeah, you're blocked. It's
Jeff,
more like we're kind of completing one another's like ideas.
Yeah,
that's how I see it. You know, that's more healthy discussion.
Jeff, I would love to hear your clergy cliff note.
Okay, so I saw this on Apple News, but it's a Gospel Coalition article referencing a study that was done, and the article is called "Survey: Majority of American Christians Don't Believe the Gospel." Now, I will say right offhand, some of the quotes in here are kind of funny to me because I don't know who these surveyors are around, but you know, it basically is saying that a majority of people who describe themselves as Christians actually believe in a works-oriented, you know, gospel, or the way you get to heaven is by works. Which, I mean, maybe as pastors, that's not shocking to me because that's, I mean, almost everybody I know in my church, when you come down to it, has some form of this in there. Even myself, you know, I even catch myself like trying to earn God's favor somehow. But this was it was released by the Cultural Research Center at Arizona Christian University on August 4th. The article is from the 9th, and Joe Carter's the author at the TGC article. But I have the actual report pulled up, and I have full release number 8, Views of Sin and Salvation. I just had highlighted a few things. So this is talking about the irrelevance of sin. And this is what the article or the research says. Amazingly, a majority of people who describe themselves as Christian, 52%, accept a works-oriented means of God's acceptance. Even more shocking, however, is that a huge proportion of people associated with churches whose official doctrine says eternal salvation comes only from embracing Jesus Christ as Savior and not from being or doing good, believe that a person can qualify for heaven by being or doing good. Now, it said amazingly and shocking, but I'm neither amazed or shocked by that stat. I mean, that's like, that seems about right to me. This was interesting, though. This salvation can be earned perspective fits well with other widely held views identified in the same survey that are at odds with biblical teaching, which includes these. 58% of people surveyed said there is no absolute moral truth. 58% said the basis of truth are factors or sources other than God. 77% said right and wrong is determined by factors other than the Bible. 59% said the Bible is not the authoritative and true word of God. 69% said people are basically good. And 79% said the personal definition of success is not based on consistent obedience to God. So there's some really interesting stuff in this survey. Pastors, I'd say it's worth your time to read it. I just am reading a few highlights, but here's my couple of questions. I assume, did all of you basically grow up in the church or were around the church when you were young?
Pastor's
Yeah.
kid. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm a youth group kid, all that. So here's my question. Like, in thinking, like, how did we get here? My questions are like, what was your experience of Christianity as a kid, and what was the gospel that you heard?
Mm. I could take that one.
Go ahead.
Growing up, I grew up just one extra altar call from being IFB. Like I was pretty, independent fundamental.
That's independent fundamental Baptist for those of you who don't know.
For those who don't know, like we were the King James only for the most part, and every now and then you might let a gospel group come in as long as you can pre-hear their music.
Lots of yelling, amen.
Yes,
but
it really was.
Amen.
Hey man. But seriously, I went to a camp when I was like 14, and that's when I started to feel the call to ministry for student ministry. And I went back to my church that summer, and I realized I had this little epiphany. I don't know if a deacon at this church could actually share the gospel with me. Like, I knew it because I had been hearing it at work. I was like, I know my deacons, and I care about them. They're nice enough guys, but I don't know if they did. So I actually, as soon as I got my license, I started driving. Ironically enough, I drove and visited the church that I'm now serving at. And I went there 2 months and no one spoke to me. I'm like, I'm never coming to this church again. So I actually left this church. And I ended up, my friend, I brought him to visit this church, and he was like a couple years older than me. He goes, you need to come to my church. We got a youth thing, but you just need to come. And I went and visited him, and his church just met at his pastor's house. And it was a Presbyterian church, Westminster Pres. And they're the more conservative branch of Presbyterian church. And the students there were using words that I had never heard before. And I'm like, what is this mysticism I'm hearing about? But I'm intrigued. And honestly, the student pastor there took me under his wing and started discipling me. Now, if you know anything, when you go from an IFB church to a conservative Presbyterian Calvinist church, you're going to be rubbed wrong a few ways. So I told my youth pastor to go get his college degree money back.
Oh my gosh.
I said, they made you a heretic. And then he just gave me a Bible. He said, well, just read it and ask God to help you believe what he wants you to believe, not what you want to believe. And that's a whole different road. But I guess the point I'm trying to make was, man, it took me 3 churches and a whole denomination shift in my own town before I found some people who would articulate the gospel, who would love me through my my pride and my arrogance. So I do think that, but if you would have gone to any of these other churches, I'm not saying that it wasn't in the current church I'm at, but it wasn't in the space that I was there in the student ministry. I mean, it wasn't. I mean, I went to youth and they threw a roll of toilet paper out, and the youth pastor was like, roll it back up. And they're like, we can't. He goes, and you can't take back what you say either. Let's have some pizza. Like there was no.
So
no
it was
gospel.
more about morality than.
It was absolute morality. The youth group I grew up in, or the church I grew up in, it was about morality, reading the right version of the Bible, singing the songs the right way, having the right color of the carpet. And I think that that's actually, I don't know what it is in y'all side of the country. It's still buried in here really thick, the moral living. And that's why, to be honest, regardless of where you land on, monergism and synergism, for me, the first time I heard, like, you don't play near as big of a part in this thing as you think you do, that just pulled the carpet out from under my feet.
I don't know, Andrew, you can like correct me if I'm wrong, but I always felt like DTS, they produce like Dallas Seminary produces like a certain kind of pastor that creates certain kinds of churches. Like it's like most DTS pastors I've met have been like non-denominational pastors, and they have like this almost like a lot of them have this very similar, like they preach expositionally and they love charts and they love like they really like they love information, like giving out the information, and they love like they have the Wednesday Bible studies where it's just like deep, nuanced stuff. And so like before coming to my current church in Wisconsin, the only church I've ever been in have been churches pastored by Dallas Seminary people. And so my view of church has always been very like soft academic, if that makes sense. Like
Yeah.
like I need to like
Pastor as
obviously
theologian type of thing.
yeah,
learn
but
more,
but
learn more, learn more, learn more, learn more.
Yeah.
yeah, and it's been also like so kind of what Delmar said, it's like it's about like learning the right stuff, but like it's very specific stuff. Like obviously like dispensationalism was a very big deal. I learned much more about dispensationalism than I learned about like creation in the churches I grew up in. You know what I'm saying? And it's one of those things where it's like I just remember, when I was in middle school and high school, seeing these big charts of like all the things that happened during the rapture and all this other stuff, and I heard and like I don't want to discredit my church. I learned the gospel there. I got saved there. I got like they preached the truth, but it was more of like if you have the right information, then that's what made you right, not necessarily like right behavior. So I don't want to say
Gnosticism.
yeah, almost like that. And I don't think that's because obviously I know Dallas seminary grads are like,
Right.
they're amazing.
Wait, you
Andrew's
don't
one of
necessarily
them.
think Gnosticism is bad? Is that what
No,
you're
no,
just...
no, no, no. I think Gnosticism
He's
is
off.
bad.
Heresy.
But what I'm saying is it's like accidental Gnosticism is what I think happens in this church.
That's fair.
Where it's like they have such like really smart congregants that could like explain to you certain Greek words without taking a single Greek class and like they so good in those like nerdy books that like charts and graphs about different Bible stories and timelines and all that stuff. But like
And then they're a jerk to their wife.
exactly when it comes to
Right.
like actually like loving
Living
your
it.
kids well and stuff like that. And like within my church growing up, and it doesn't happen until I started working there, but I saw the fruits of it earlier. It created this like patriarchal, I don't know how to say that word, but patriarchal, is that the right word?
Patriarchal.
There you go.
Situation. I talked about this last week where like the women were wearing head coverings and they were like reading Growing Kids God's Way and they had like these special things to like whack kids and stuff.
Oh, I'm a Growing Kids God's Way dad, so
Careful.
I might take some issue with that.
Can we get some pushback, please?
Hey, I took a Growing Kids God's Way class and I don't have.
I did
kids,
too. 16 weeks.
But I took it and I was like, I'm gonna be a way better father to my dog. Like I'm gonna like when I punish you, I'm gonna explain to you so you understand why you're being disciplined. You know why, right?
So you have a really good dog now.
I have the most obedient dog ever. But what I'm saying is this is like I'm sure you guys would agree that though Growing Kids God's Way has really good biblical principles, it could be abused to
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Homeboy's got daughters. Come on. I've got 4 sons. The stuff in that class has so little to do with my boys mooning people out the front window or whatever else they may be doing. He doesn't cover that at all.
He does not.
In that class. Like some guy that has 2 little girls, painting himself as the expert. But
so I was going to say, it's just like, I think, so my upbringing growing up, there was a moment during Bible college and then like, especially, I would say more so in the past like 5 years, where I had to kind of peel back that like, it's not about academics or like how much knowledge you have, but like practically speaking, the early Christ followers were like, and not in a demeaning way, simple people who practically understood what it meant to follow Jesus. And so like, though there's a place for like education and academics, and I value that in my own life, I think that was almost idolized in my upbringing as a church. So therefore, there's a lot of head knowledge, but not a lot of practical Christian living, which I think with the data you just shared, Jeff, totally makes sense.
It makes sense. And I know whenever I went to seminary, my pastor pulled me aside because he knows how I am as a human. And he said, here, this is a great thing, but please don't become educated beyond your humility. And for me, I think that a lot of the world sees the church as a people who can articulate their holy book really well, but they don't necessarily live it out very well. And, I'm definitely a proponent of like, the way you share the gospel is using words, but it is definitely reinforced with the way you live.
If necessary.
If necessary.
I don't like that quote either. I used to love it though. Back in my emergent days,
faith comes through hearing. Sorry,
I think we could
right.
go through any different faith system. It's I didn't grow up one altar call short of an IBF church. Like my or IFB church. My parents met at Bob Jones University.
Yeah.
That's my parents met in freshman speech class at Bob Jones University. My dad has multiple degrees from that fine institution, and I
Did
went
they
to
wave
Dallas
at each other
Seminary.
from the sidewalks, or
They,
like how did they?
My mom transferred to a nursing school
Oh,
elsewhere,
okay.
but and then I went to Dallas Seminary. So my whole upbringing and thought pattern has been challenged here. So thanks, guys. But I don't think the issue is necessarily one system or one type of church versus the other. I think the issue is just discipleship in general.
Yes.
If
You're
you
right.
look at what the stats say that in let's take 1990 or 1995, an average church member spent 3 hours a week at church.
Yeah.
And now 25, 30 years later, an average church member, someone that considers themselves an active member of a church,
Might come
spends
twice a month.
I was gonna say spends 3 hours a month at the church.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So it's not just that, well, yes, we're adding more and more, ideas of karma and works-based salvation. Well, because we're watching way more streaming television, we're spending way less time at church. So, yeah, people's minds are going to get changed because they're not being discipled. And, churches function differently than they did 25 or 30 years ago. And we used to think that discipleship only happens from the pulpit, well, with you listening, and now there's more small groups
Right.
than there were 25 or 30 years ago. So that's a big part of it as well. But it comes down to how much time, how much time are people actually spending being discipled? Because if you ask it's the 10,000 hours principle. If you ask someone to be an expert on their faith when truthfully they've only put, maybe 200 hours into genuinely thinking about what they believe over the past 5 or 10 years, they're not going to believe rightly.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up that discipleship piece too. My upbringing was Southern Baptist, and it was all about the sinner's prayer. So it was how quickly can we get someone to say the prayer. We had challenges for how many people can you lead to the Lord. I went to, man, I don't know if you guys heard of this camp. It was Frontliners Camp. You heard of this?
Mm-mm.
The idea was simple. A bunch of youth groups would get together. They would do 2 days of evangelism, quote unquote, evangelism training, and then we would do 2 days of door-to-door knocking. We were split into groups, and the group who could, quote, save the most people was awarded a gift card at the end of the camp. So
that's what it's about.
I was fired up. You better believe that. And I would step in. So if we would get to the Romans Road, and then there were multiple times where, we're knocking on doors and we're in the Romans Road. Then I would insert myself right before the sinner's prayer just so I could notch that win and get the sinner's prayer from that person. And then we'd give them a card because we would travel. We would give them a card to whatever church we were stationed at for our Frontliners camp. So it was heavy on how quickly can somebody say a prayer, and here's a card to a church that you may or may not ever attend. So this whole idea of discipleship was just lost, and it was all about, man, can we get them to say a prayer? Because that is what it's all about.
And to be fair, it was coming from I think it was coming from a good place. We have to, say that. I would wonder, there's no way to track it now, but how many people that you handed a card to, maybe 1 out of 100 went to that church, and I mean, that's cool. I think for me, like, where I see this popping up in the people in my church currently, and I think there's a whole nother conversation about, like, anecdotally in my mind, there's got to be a parallel between the people who took this survey, and I don't know about you guys, but I feel like I'm one of the only people my age that I know that's really involved in the church. Like, many of the people that I know that are my age are not involved in a church. And there's, like, how many friends from youth group are still involved in church? I mean, for me, it's like, it's pretty minimal, So that's what I'm saying. Like, what was the difference maker for people like us? For me, I point to discipling relationships. One particular pastor who discipled me, and I think it was that to me, I'm becoming more and more convinced about the idea of practices. And you look at different streams of Christianity and church history, and kind of the spirituality stream or the spiritual formation stream. And I just preached in John 8. And Jesus there talks about, the truth will set you free. And those of you who practice sin will become slaves to sin or enslaved to it. And it's this idea, like, what you practice is what you believe. I mean, Frank, you and I used to have a shirt with that slogan. And so, I mean, my experience in youth group was just that. The depth of discipleship practice was like a morning devo. Like that was it. There was no other practices in my life. There was nothing that touched my finances other than giving to the church. There was nothing that touched my time other than being at church. So there wasn't any of the spiritual disciplines that you see in church history that would ground me in a practice-based, faith-driven, like, spiritual life that I think is what Jesus is talking about when he talks about abiding. So for me, I see this popping up in my church, and in Baltimore in particular, it's the oldest Catholic diocese in the country. So almost everybody here has a Catholic background, which means they still have this, like who was saying earlier, it's like still deep down in me. Like they still have a deep down in them, like they view me as kind of the priest and I'm closer to God, and they come to me and tell me stuff. And I just would say, like, younger pastors listening to this is one of those areas that it's just gonna take a long time, and you just have to stay at it, and you just have to keep planting gospel seeds, even with people who have been church members for decades, because you're just gonna keep seeing this works-based thing pop itself up in how they act and what they believe, and the way it's like they just want, honestly, works-based salvation is easier in a sense, because I know what I got. If I do this and this and this, then I'm good. But actually having faith and like aligning my life with the kingdom of God and following Christ, like that's hard, because like there's nothing there's nothing there other than faith to ground me to, which is all you need. And I think that's the paradox of the gospel. So yeah, that I just wanted to bring that research up. I'm not shocked or amazed by it, but it is important.
If there's one part of my pastoral ministry where like I'm not asking to evolve away from, like I really appreciate all these new modern like non-denominational churches that are doing like really like edgy stuff, and like I love Michael Todd's preaching style and I love like that kind of stuff. But like where I diverge from a lot of that stuff is when it comes to like the necessity of, because what you said, the first thing that comes to my mind is, of course, it's like pastors don't necessarily, this is going to sound really old fashioned, pastors don't preach the gospel anymore in their sermons. You know what I'm saying? Like, and I know that's almost like, it's like almost oddly traditional to say, but like one thing we do in our sermon evals at our church is every time we preach, we have to answer the question, what's the gospel connection, no matter where you are in scripture. And that's one value that I really appreciate, because especially where I'm at, like you said, Jeff, there's not a lot of people our age are in ministry, but we also live in what I would consider probably the and probably you too, Jeff, are in the few places that's becoming a post-Christian community in America, right? Where like you're not in the Christian South anymore. And
I run into a lot of people that are my age that had no church background growing up, and it's so odd for me.
yeah,
Like they don't know. I remember, I don't remember what Bible story, but it would be like I referenced Noah and the ark, and the guy was like, "What's that?" And I was
dude,
like, "I've never run into this before. What do you mean, what's that?"
my student ministry first got here didn't know where Genesis was, and like that's not a joke. They didn't know where Genesis was in the Bible. They knew it was a book of the Bible. They didn't know it was the first book, and so it's like the necessity to reinforce the gospel in your sermons is huge. But I think also like what you said completely nails it. Is like we need to come back. We need to step away from this performance-based church thing where we just have this really good I think we can still have really good production and a good services are engaging, but man, discipleship is where like life change is transformed. And like what you said, like I'm sure all of us can say the pivotal moment in our walk was when someone like pushed us there, like someone showed us what it looked like, someone challenged us. It wasn't necessarily the sermon on the stage that pushed us, it was the deacon or the elder or the small group leader who said, let me show you what this looks like. And most of our people are not in small groups, and most of our people don't have consistent discipleship. Their devotional life is Bible app notifications of the verse of the day.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And it's like that's not enough to sustain our faith. As I don't know.
Well, my discipleship has to be the cumulative effect of a lot of conversations and lunches.
Oh gosh,
For
yes.
sure.
And that's what I think that's what you're saying.
Well, where I'm at is that stat you shared earlier. We get 3 hours a month now for a lot of people. So here's just my thinking, just as a pastor and a communicator. You have at most 3 hours that they're giving you maybe by default. Why would we fluff up that 3 hours with something they can get off of a TED talk? Like, it really should be. I mean, this is a time ever where, like Frank says, we have to be going, okay, here's your problem, but here's how the gospel interacts with your problem. And if there's some other things that you might can pick up, sure, but it really is going to the core issue. And then I think even into our sermons, we need to build entrance ramps into the world of discipleship for our people. One of the entrance ramps is application at the end. Okay. Like, show me the tall order that scripture says. Like, I want to see that. So I know, like, because maybe that's going to draw me in. But also, I think another great entrance ramp for just the discipleship process in our preaching, we should be talking about church history. Like, we had an entire Reformation where people were murdered to show the beauty of salvation based on faith alone, and when we roll into it and say, well, faith alone, but you also have to make sure you quote this little prayer perfectly. Like, now what is it? That's witchcraft. Like, what are we teaching them? So I think, like, that's another entrance ramp. And then even if we do offer groups, and I think one of the other articles that has been shared for Cliff Notes today gets into that a little bit, like, we have to have more entrance ramps to discipleship. Because for me, the thing that brought me to church was the church that I went to in high school was their knowledge of scripture. But what kept me there was the people's desire to know me, and like, they poured into me. It was about 3 people who were just like, that's my dude. And I'm going to make a point to be something in his life. And I think we owe that to our people. Now, the tension we're in right now, and hopefully there's an other side to some of this, is how do you do that when most people are interacting through a screen right now? I think that's a tension that a lot of pastors face. And I think for me, one of the things I'm having to learn is the power to liking and responding to social media. Like, how many times do I comment and people just comment, and I just like it? What would it be like to be like, let me practice a little emotional intelligence and say, hey, you posted that you probably feel pretty bad right now, and just engage. Because right now people, they do want to respond. I did that in Practically Pastoring. Just so you know, if you're in the Facebook group, some of you are our guinea pigs, and thank you, because you commented, and then we went in there and we started responding to you under it, because, like, genuinely we want to get to know you. And I found, like, our post became that much more engaging when it's a double-sided thing.
Yeah. I want to transition to the next thing, but before I do that, I want to say this, because I know sometimes when we mention other pastors, sometimes it almost sounds like a cheap shot. I want to make sure this is on the record. I actually really like Michael Todd. I've been watching his videos, and he comes from a different style of church than me. It's a little more charismatic and stuff like that. But, like, dude, he talks about, like, repentance and fighting sin in a way that I haven't seen young 30-something pastors preach like it's really dope. And so I just want to make sure, like, I think all of us here have a very nuanced perspective on some of this stuff, where it's like, there's very few pastors I'm just kind of like completely blocking out of my life. There's a lot of people where, like, I can take the meat and spit out the bones.
Yep.
Some people.
Matter of fact, Michael Todd, if you want to come on the show, because we know that you've been listening, hey, I'll leave so you can come on.
I clap when I preach now because of him. Hey, so that was a great Clergy Cliff Note time. I want to transition into what will be our main discussion. Which I'm actually very interested, because I don't have any kids. All you 4 do.
You said you had a dog that was like your kid.
I do have a dog, but I mean, you
That
don't
doesn't
create
count.
children. So at least, I mean, hopefully we don't. Anyways, so I want to talk about family ministry balance. If there's one thing I'm very self-aware of, the more I've done ministry, is that when I'm passionate about an upcoming sermon or project or whatever, there's no boundaries. Like, I will work all kinds of hours. I will bring my work home, and so to have that consistency of having a balance is somewhat difficult for me. But since I don't have kids, that there's a little bit more freedom for me. but that's probably not necessarily true for you guys. And I would love to know, and maybe our listeners have some thoughts or questions about this, is how do you keep a good work and ministry and personal life balance? Therefore, you're protecting your kids and your spouse.
I could jump in here. I'm not a huge fan of the word balance, because that says that we do this much ministry, then this much family, and then maybe at the end of the day, this gets
it's a misnomer. I agree.
Scales, because there are seasons of ministry that are going to be heavy, and my family knows that they're going to be heavy seasons of ministry, and then they also know that there are going to be seasons where I'm going to see daddy a whole lot more than other kids get to see their daddy. And so I see it as more of a rhythm in ministry and not necessarily a balance.
That's good.
In family and ministry. So for me, I do have boundaries in place, like many of you do. I do have a protected day off. I do try to get off my cell phone when I'm with my family, and there's little things like that. But I think that the bigger piece here is not that it's I do this much family and then this much ministry. It's that I know, and my family now knows, that hey, there are seasons where daddy's going to be not as present, and then there's going to be times where we're going to get a whole lot of daddy that's really, really awesome.
Yeah, sharing your schedule. Oh, go ahead, Andrew. You want to talk?
Oh, I was just going to say, some of the best ministry relationship advice is from Toby and Jim talking on The Office, when Jim and Pam were going through their tough spot there in season 9. And it was kind of like if she says, if she could tough this out, it's going to be so great for our family. And Toby, who we all hate him, but he says something brilliant to the extent of, well, how long? It's kind of difficult to ask someone to be miserable indefinitely. And so, there are seasons, and there are times when 40 hours a week, man, I wish.
Right.
But to communicate to your family, hey, for the next 3 weeks, this, and this has to happen. But once this is done, once we get to this point, we'll be able to do this, and this that we can't do now, or we'll be able to, do this that we haven't been doing then. This church during a global pandemic caused a whole lot of extra hours and different kinds of hours here at the beginning. And then the past couple weeks, we were in Arkansas for 2 weeks, and then came back and then just took off and did Disney for several days in the middle of a work week, because there's the flexibility in ministry to do that. Where it was, yes, we worked really, really hard and things were chaotic, but we're also going to do this other extra stuff that we couldn't do. And so I think kind of, a timestamp on here is how long the crazy is going to last. And then once this crazy is done, we're going to take extra recovery time, more so than just a 1-day Sabbath, or more so than just the guaranteed 2 weeks that you get in your contract or whatever your employment agreement is. And so, number one for us is to put a timestamp on whatever difficulty is going to be in. And then also just to let the kids be a part of whatever you're doing. It's daddy is a pastor, therefore we get to. Right. My kids think it is so cool to invite their friends into dad's office. And part of that is the church that I grew up in, the pastor's office was this mausoleum looking room that, you couldn't touch anything. And the only time anyone ever went in there was to get yelled at for something. And so my kids get to invite their friends into daddy's office, and it becomes the post-church playground. I don't know how many things have been broken or how many Legos have been stepped on after church, a couple days later, because kids were building something in here. But to invite the children into the process of, hey, if we're going to be here a lot, you're going to be here as well. And you get to do some extra things at the church that most other kids don't get a chance to do. If you want to sing Moana with the church sound system, we can turn on that sound system
awesome.
And crank it up. You get access to things that other kids don't get access to because of what daddy does.
Yeah,
that's good.
I found in my family that you love your family well through helpful information. Like for me, this is some stuff you might need to know that's coming that's helpful. For me, a lot of times Sunday night when I get in, I say, hey, just so you know, Thursday night is my long night this week, and Tuesday is my early day. And for me, like, you love them through helpful information, but the double-edged sword is you can hurt them through too much information, right? So like, man, there's sometimes it's just tough, and you come home and it's hard to like leave that. And actually, my father-in-law of all people gave me this great advice, and it's actually very good. He says he went and visited a pastor friend of his house one time, at his house one time, and outside the house there was a tree, and it was just the bark was worn off of it. And he's like, "Why is the bark worn off the tree?" He goes, "That's my problems tree." He said, "Every day when I get off work, I pass this tree to go into my house. I touch the tree, and that is me checking in, and like, I leave my problems on that tree. And the next day when I walk out and go back to work, I touch it again. That's my way of it's like an emotional but a very like real thing. And I thought that was a really good way to help me like not bring too much information at home. One of the ways I do to protect that, and I realize this may not be possible for a lot of people, but one of the things is, for the most part, I don't work at home. I don't. Like, the only thing I do at home is, once the kids and my wife are asleep, I will edit this podcast, but that is fun because I love playing you guys back and forth. Look at your beautiful faces, but like, but just, I don't. And like, I even have a little office, but it's more like the man cave where my son likes to come in and play virtual reality. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't, because I'm a 3W2, so I'm like, I got to be the cheerleader even at home. I have a hard time shutting it off. So for me, having, like, I know when I walk in here, this is a protected place from me, then that helps me out. And then one other thing we do, and it's kind of a staff thing, and it's led from the top, and my pastor actually gave me permission to do this, my pastor over me. He says, listen, 2 nights a week. You give the Lord 2 nights a week, but the rest of the nights you need to be home with your family. He helps us protect that. And then, like you said, it's a ministry season. So like, if it's VBS week, well, you know what I'm saying? But like, if it's a regular week and I'm having to push more than 2, then I have to answer to my wife because I've let her know that.
I think for me, my temptation is to always add a little bit more. I call it like I'll just do this real quick disease, where I'm like, oh, I can just do this real quick. I just do this real quick. And before I know it, I'm working like every night and every morning. So I think the principle underneath all of this conversation, because for me, this is what I have to remind myself of. The principle underneath it is that your church needs you to be emotionally and spiritually healthy more than they need you to be productive. They need you to be productive, but your church needs a healthy leader more than it needs you to be some version of productivity that we worship as an idol in this country. We worship the idol of progress and productivity, but at the expense of health. And how many leaders of big ministries have you seen burn themselves out or do something stupid? And so, like, I would rather be a healthy leader who stays in my church for 30, 40 years, retires happy, my kids love the Lord, and we have a great family than to build some big ministry. Like, it's not worth it to me, because and I think one of the ways that I've seen pastors like kind of fail at this, and where I see the danger, is like the emotional availability that you have for your wife and your children. And I mean, in First Timothy, we're told, if you don't provide for your family, you're worse than an unbeliever and basically disqualified for ministry. But I think we read that and we only think of financial provision, but there is provision that comes, and I'm speaking as a guy, as the husband and kind of the father in the home. There is a provision of your healthy emotional presence to your family, that if you are not providing that, I think that you might need to grapple with the reality that you might be disqualified from ministry, because the home is the proving ground for ministry life. And single guys, that doesn't exclude you, but I'm just saying, I think there's more to, if you can't provide for your family, there's more to that than just finances. I do think there's something there with finances, and that's a whole nother conversation. And my wife was the bread earner for a number of years when we first got married, but that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying, for me, the principle has to come back to, like, your family is your first ministry. And if you don't do that well, if you are willing to sacrifice that ministry for the sake of, your church, I think that's, you're flipping things upside down. Because if you're a healthy leader, in your home and you're a healthy leader at church, that's going to be far better for your church than you being extra productive and, kind of burning your soul out. So practically speaking, what I do is, again, I totally agree with what I think all of you have said. It's seasonal. Like ministry is not, it's just there's seasons, not only in seasons in ministry, but seasons in life. I have small kids right now in the home. So I have a daughter that's 5. When we were doing foster care in Florida, we had 3 kids at one point. And so, like, I have small children, which means there's specific needs that small kids have. I know all of us follow a guy like Carey Nieuwhof, and we're like, how in the world is he writing this much? And well, all his kids are grown and probably out of the house and like they're older. So they don't require time with them to learn how to ride their bike or whatever. And changing diapers and stuff. That's the season that I'm in. That's the season most of us are in on this podcast with kids. I think most of your kids are pretty young, right? So they just require a specific, emotional presence from you and all that. And so for me, like, I realized in this church, nobody cares where I'm at in the morning in the church. So I come into the office a little later. Now, sometimes I'll get up real early and come into the office from like 6 to 8. And then I'll go home like at 8:30, eat breakfast with my wife and my daughter. And then I'll come back to the office at like 9:30. And like nobody misses it. And so that's a way I've protected family time. And then I'm a couple nights a week doing a class or something. And I love whoever said, involve your kids. Andrew, that was you, I guess. Involve your kids. I mean, my daughter's the same way. I live in a parsonage. So if I'm walking out of the house to walk to my office, she's always asking, like, can I come to your office? Can I come hang out? And she's singing in the microphones and playing the drums in the church and all that. So, I just think it's a matter of like prioritizing your health, because the position that you're in your church is like, you need to be healthy to be in that position. You can't be unhealthy in your soul and lead other people and shepherd people.
So can I get under that with one more like fundamental question? Because I know that there are people right now who they don't have children yet, or maybe they're not married, but there is something I wish I would have done before all of that would have helped me a lot. And all of you have been saying it in your own way, but it really comes down to this. You need to philosophically understand what it means in your life to be successful as a pastor. Because it's not like running a Popeyes. It's not, we need to franchise out 5 more and, have 15 services. I mean, in a very real leadership way, we tend to like hang success over the numbers. And we know that that's a tight line we have to walk, because numbers do tell stories. We can make that argument, but like success in the most clear vein is how obedient are you being to God in your call? And in that obedience, it's not necessarily about me even necessarily having the accolades. One of the most successful people in ministry I know on this planet is this lady. She is at our church. She's 87 years old. 3 days a week, she comes and walks around the church and prays for every staff member and every congregation she could think of by name. She's successful, she's successful. And I think what I'm hearing and what I wish I would have done, I always used to think success means you're running the thing, and once you're running the thing looks good. Now we want to be excellence in everything we do, but like really our success as ministers, it is saying, I'm going to be obedient to God in this season of life, the way he's called me to be, and I'm going to trust him with the results. So to me, yeah.
Oh, I was going to say to jump off of that, like,
yeah,
that obedience to God's calling on your life is super important when it comes to fighting what you feel are expectations from people in your church.
Man, yes.
Like, because you can just fall victim to being enslaved to what you think people's expectations are of you in your church, as opposed to what God called you to do in that church. So, because in a small church like me, 50 people, I am constantly saying to myself, like, well, am I doing enough? Because so-and-so probably wants to have a class. And what about this? And I should be building this. And I just have to come back to like, no, God has called me to do this specific thing in this church, make disciples, and he's called me to lead in my home. So, and I would say too, for young guys listening, like those of you that are youth pastors that are looking eventually at, the possibility of senior pastorate, this needs to be a big part of the conversation when you interview.
Yes.
You need to have this in your mind when you're interviewing. What are your expectations? In our notes here, we have about our wives and our children. that is same thing. What are your expectations of my wife? If you're going to a smaller church that's older, they may assume she's going to play piano and run women's ministry. And you need to ask that question, because now in my situation, this church has amazingly, I've never had any of that pressure. And in past ministries, my wife was the children's director at like 3 of the churches I was the youth pastor at. So that's a whole nother story. But that whole thing of being the pastor's wife or the PK, they can experience some pressure that is difficult, and you need to ask those questions when you're interviewing.
Yeah, I think that's really good, Jeff. Growing up a PK myself, I now have 5 kids of my own who all identify as PKs. It's so important that they have a safe space to come to you and ask questions. I didn't have that in my house growing up. I was kind of scared to ask my parents certain things. Last week, my 9-year-old son came to me and said, "Daddy, is it okay if sometimes I don't like going to church?" I'm like, yep, sometimes Daddy doesn't like going to church. Like that is a very safe question to ask. So one thing that we try to do in my house is create those safe spaces where they know, hey, before they go to bed, I go into their rooms every night, and I usually try to spend just a couple minutes with each one of them and just kind of talk a little bit. And as they get older, those conversations are now very much more in depth and are now turning theological, which is a lot of fun for me. But it's fun to think about because I didn't necessarily have those types of conversations growing up as a PK, and seeing I was the youngest of 5, seeing my 3 older brothers essentially walk away from the church as a result of damage done to them through the church. There's a very soft spot in my heart for PKs and for protecting them. I love, Jeff, that you brought up the interview idea. I did that in my church setting. That was one of the first things I asked was, what do you expect of my wife and what do you expect of my kids? So we laid that foundation very, very early. It's still my hope and prayer that my wife and kids don't feel a whole lot of pressure to constantly have to do and be at the church all the time.
I want them to just feel like every other member.
No, I agree with you.
Like a highly involved member.
Mm-hmm. And then I also love how Andrew brought up the behind the scenes thing. That's a big deal for my kids. They get the behind the scenes on church life in a lot of ways. So,
absolutely.
Del, you and I are very different because I 100% office from home now. So my sermon writing time is often done with my 3-year-old on my shoulders. And I've gotten used to it, and I can now do it pretty well. And every Saturday night.
That's pretty awesome. I'm going to give you credit because that is actually that's an art, what you're talking about right there.
So Saturday nights, for the last 3 weeks, my son has come in, and when I'm doing my final read through of my manuscript, and he says, "Dad, can I read a little bit of your sermon this week?" So every week he gets a preview of the sermon before it's preached. He just thinks that is the coolest thing. He gets access to it before somebody else does. So just those little bitty moments that we can
making
create.
Your kids feel like an insider. That's cool.
It's a lot of fun. And then the big thing for my wife and I, and this is the last thing here for us, is calendar syncing. That has been the number one communication piece for us in my home. We have a family calendar that my wife updates every month, and it details our stuff. And then my wife and I sync so my wife knows that I'm praying for Jose tomorrow at 11 o'clock on the phone. Like, that's how detailed she knows about my day. So we know exactly.
And she has veto power over his calendar.
She has veto power. So she has turned things down. Mm-hmm. I have given her full veto power over my calendar.
So okay. So what I'm gathering is really serving your family well as a pastor means you have to love them the way they need to be loved. Because I went and did that for my wife. I was like, "Let me cut on the calendar for you." She's like, "Sure." She comes to me next day. She goes, "Cut it off. Take it off now. My phone is going off every 15 minutes. Stop it from doing that. My battery is already dead. Stop it." So
that's funny.
That's why I have the little Sunday briefings. But I think it's kind of what you said. You're loving your wife the way she needs to be loved. I know for my wife, that means oftentimes I say no for her a lot, so she doesn't have to. It's a way of loving. And then if she's gonna say yes, I don't do that for her. I let her say yes. So
I think adapting to like your church's culture too is really important. Like,
oh gosh,
I know for me, like I'm in a smaller church. I'm the solo pastor. There's no other staff around. So on the one hand, like it means my schedule is whatever I want it to be. So and I don't mean this in a negative way, but I take advantage of that when it comes to like my family time. So like I can leave the office at 2 p.m. and go spend the afternoon in the park or whatever. As long as, the work is getting done and the ministry is happening, like that's totally fine. Cause it's not about hours in its place. It's about, shepherding the flock. And, my family is part of that flock, but they're also a special piece of that flock that God has given me oversight of in a unique way. And so I'm going to spend extra time with him.
Guys, this was a really good conversation. And I was like, in my mind, I was like taking mental notes of things I wanted to add. And you guys all said the things I wanted you to say. Like, the one thing I was going to mention was like the whole interview process. And like one thing I always say, and it's not just senior pastor stuff. It's like every role in the church.
No, agreed.
If you're interviewing, you need to have this question ready. What's the expectation of my spouse? Because for most of us, the only expectation for a pastor's wife or a pastor's husband, I guess in some cases, a pastor's spouse, is to care and love for their spouse. And like that's their job. Their job doesn't need to be, and like one thing like I want to make sure is known as like, let's not just say in theory, yeah, they're free to do whatever they want. They don't have to do anything. But like in practice, they should be at every event. Like I have a friend who has lamented to me.
Unspoken expectations will kill you.
I have a friend who's lamented to me. He's a pastor in Florida, and his wife just had a second kid, and like they feel guilty because the pastors and the elders have said, "Why is your wife not here?" And he's like, she's raising two very, very young children. Like she's busy. She can't come to Wednesday night youth group study because she's at home caring for my kids, you know? And so like stuff like that, it's like, man, I want to make sure that, and maybe we should do a whole episode on this, is talk about like job interview expectations and what you should do.
That would be excellent.
It's a good topic.
Because there's so many pastors who go into this with feeling like all the cards are in the church's hands, when majority of the cards are actually in your hands, and you should be probably asking a lot more questions than they are, because it's very easy for a church to hire the wrong candidate and then fire them. It's much harder to be a pastor getting hired by a wrong church and then feeling stuck, you know? And so knowing those questions are important. Great. Let's transition to the final thing, the question of the day. Our buddy in the Facebook group, Chris Moore, has given us a bunch of questions, and this was one of the more interesting ones, I thought. So we can quickly answer. Each of us can answer this if you have one. What is the craziest thing a parishioner has ever said to you?
Should we give context or just say what they said?
I think you should just say it. Just say it first.
Give a little bit of context, hopefully.
All right, I'm going to go first because mine is ridiculously wild and we might have to cut this out. So at the end of a service, a woman who technically she wasn't a parishioner. She was there visiting for the day. She was, well, I don't even want to give any more details, but she was visiting for the day. She was going to be moving on. She came up to me. She's the age of my mother, at least. And she said, Pastor, can you pray for me? And I was like, oh, absolutely. In my denomination, we anoint with oil too. So she asked if I could anoint her with oil on the head, and that'll detail will be important in a minute. And she said, can you pray for me and anoint me with oil? And I said, absolutely. What can I pray for you about? And she said, well, I just went to the doctor and I have a tumor in my vagina. Can you pray for me? And I was like, this was my first year as a senior pastor. I did not know what to do. Thank God somehow I had poker face. And I was like, okay, hey, so-and-so, can you come over here? Hey, woman leader in the church, could you come over here and pray with me? So yeah, that's the craziest thing anybody has ever said to me. And it was right after a service in front of everyone. It's pretty wild.
Wait. You like hinted towards something, but you didn't complete it. What was she suggesting that you need to anoint?
No. I was just saying, I just wanted to make sure nobody made that connection.
Okay.
Okay.
I was making sure nobody even thought
You're
to
not
make
going
that
to
connection.
cancel Jeff Simpson today.
No,
Okay.
yeah, we're deleting this part.
I thought, no, we're not deleting this part. I wanted to know that because
I just didn't want anyone to think, wait, what? No, she asked me specifically, can you anoint my forehead? And then she said the tumor was where it was.
Wow. Yeah.
So
I'll go next because mine is not as funny as more of it's like kind of sad.
You young guys getting into older churches, be ready.
Yeah, be ready for that. So I don't know. I don't think I shared it on this podcast, but I've shared it on my other podcasts, is where my very first sermon, I was probably like 22 22, maybe even 21. It was at my church in Tampa that I was a youth pastor in, and I had the very first opportunity to preach on a Sunday service. And so I wore a really cheap suit. I was on
Oh,
stage.
dude, I remember this actually.
It was crazy. And so I preached my little heart out. Don't remember what I'm sure it was terrible, but I got off stage. And in that church, it's a normal. I'm sure a lot of churches do this. A tradition for the senior pastor or the preaching pastor to be like at the back of the room and shake everyone's hand. Everyone tells you how great you are, or whatever. And obviously, when you're guest preaching, you get extra praise because you're not the main preacher. So, oh yeah, you're like, oh, you're the future or whatever, right? So I got a lot of great stuff. Like it was super sweet. A lot of nice stuff that was said to me, and it was really, really encouraging. But there was one person who was a deacon who came up to me, and the first thing he said was, are you ever going to shave your beard? And I had like a pretty big beard, like how I've traditionally had it. And I just kind of laughed. And I was like, I don't, no, like I like my beard. And he said, well, you should shave your beard because with your skin complexion and the length of that beard, you look really Muslim. And he said this, you won't succeed. He said, you won't succeed as a pastor because you look so Muslim. And I was like, and like, and then
Tone deaf.
I was 22 and I was like, okay. And like, that's all I said. Like,
dude, I remember having a long conversation with you about this when we were back in the day in Tampa.
I mean, like looking back, I mean, it was just like, it was kind of racist. It was ignorant. And then like, every time I've told that story to people are like, haha, you have a sticker with that beard. Like that's your brand now or whatever. And like, I don't know. It was just like, I think Andrew, you talked about this last week where you said like the last thing you want to hear someone critique you or talk to you is right before a sermon, but also right after a sermon. You got to give me like an hour buffer before you start like saying some nonsense because when he said that, I was like, what? I didn't know. I thought maybe I should shave my beard. And I was like, I'm glad I talked myself out of it, or I had people in my life to talk me out of it. But that was pretty hard because that was like the first time I experienced like a form of racism with
a smile too.
With a smile. Yeah.
Oh man.
And then that was also just like, it was just a wild thing to say. I've heard of other wild things, but that was one of the wildest things that happened to me.
I had a guy pull me aside with my pastor in my first church and said, this student pastor placed defecation on the floor and made kids eat off of it.
What?
I was like, whoa.
Diaper game? Was it the diaper game?
Whoa, what? I had, the pastor was looked at me like, you did what? I'm like, I have no idea what reference, what this guy, no, it was, I made some kid eat off of dung. What happened was this is that pre-written material you get when you're green and you're like, surely it's all written by someone who knows exactly what they're doing in ministry. And we were going through Ezekiel, so I should go ahead and start there.
Yeah.
And they were like, Ezekiel was all about object lessons, so you need to use an object lesson. So they were like, just take a Snickers bar and place it on the floor and have a kid lay on his side, because that's Ezekiel had to do. He had to lay on his side and cook his food over dung. So I just placed a
city.
Yeah, yes, exactly. Yeah, so like I did that. And at the end of the lesson, the kid thought it would be funny. He picked up the Snickers bar and ate it. And
that's so good.
That's
the girls screamed and it was,
go home and tell their high-ranking deacon father that I brought in human dung and made a child eat off of human dung. Wow. So yeah, I think that was the one that caught me off guard the most.
That would be a great band name, High Ranking Deacon.
I like it.
I had an older church member tell me that he was just waiting to die. Like, hey, good morning. How are you? Well, to be honest with you, I'm just waiting to die. It's like,
oh, well.
Oh, all right. Have a great day. Like, what do you say? This was at my previous church, and his wife had just died, and so I had greeted him, and he just went into why he just didn't see the point anymore and was just waiting.
Poor guy, man.
Poor him, yes, but how do you get out of that conversation?
You don't. You just. Yeah.
I'm so sorry, man.
Wow. Mine was last year. Andrew, you were actually present for this. It was during a very emotional and heated congregational meeting. I don't know if you've ever been a part of those, but they can get out of hand really quickly, especially on the heels of the founding pastor of your church resigning
on Good Friday.
He opted not to be at this congregational meeting, so there was a lot of question marks up in the air. There were some very confused members of the church, and one older gentleman stood up, and granted, I was sitting on stage with my elders fielding these questions that were just being thrown at us. Hindsight, probably should have tackled that meeting a little bit differently, but he stood up. He said, I distinctly remember donating $10,000 so we could send mail outs to the surrounding neighborhood about our church. And instead, you guys took that money and paid this kid, then pointed at me, so you could keep him on staff. And now our founding pastor's resigned.
That was some good connection, though.
I don't know if I said anything. I think there was a lot of blank staring. I remember my wife being in the back of the room sobbing uncontrollably because she had never heard me just get verbally attacked in a public setting like that. It was brutal.
Anytime you get called this guy in a meeting, it's bad.
And I think it might have been in this kid.
And then he kept referring to Tim's all right for a youth pastor.
Yeah, he said that several times. That was really nice.
Are they still at the church?
They are not.
No.
Surprise.
The one guy's still alive.
Wow. If you're in the Facebook group, we're gonna have a post on Tuesday. I want to hear this from other people. What's the craziest thing a parishioner has ever said to you? I'm sure the youth pastors in there have some amazing ones because students say the most redonkulous things, right? It's crazy, but yeah, it's just amazing what people would say especially after or before a sermon. It's just, don't talk to me. That's not true, but it's the worst time.
How many times have you ever heard something right after a sermon and felt like saying, "Did you hear what I just said?"
I know.
It's so many times.
Yeah. Well, hey, if you are listening to this, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Please share this show with someone else. Let another pastor know about Practically Pastoring. Rate and review. Follow us on Instagram. Join the Facebook group. Remember, when we get to 500, we'll give away some shirts.
Woo-hoo!
And you can help us and possibly get one of these shirts by sharing the Instagram and the Facebook group to other people in ministry. With that being said,
I'm so nervous about my story going out.
No, it's amazing. It's amazing. With that being said, I'm Frank Gill.
I am Jeff Simpson.
I'm Delmar Pete.
I am Andrew Larson.
And I'm Timothy Miller.
And we are Practically Pastoring. See you next time.